You'd think that once we realize a habit is exhausting us, we just stop. I mean, you see the pattern, you understand the why, and for a second, everything feels clear. But then, 3 days later, you're back to overcommitting and overfunctioning like you never left. And you feel like you're failing at healing because you keep snapping back into old habits. But as it turns out, your brain is a lot more interested in the familiar than it is in the healthy. Today, we're moving beyond just understanding our patterns and into the messy work of actually changing them. We're going to explore why your body defaults to overfunctioning for safety, how to stop trying to perfect your recovery, and why the goal isn't to never fall into old patterns, but to get faster at catching yourself when you do. Over the last videos, we've unpacked a lot. We've talked about the patterns you've been carrying, where they come from, how they became part of your identity, and why doing less can feel weirdly unsafe even when part of you knows you need it. And if you've been following along through this series, there's a good chance you've had at least a few moments where things just clicked. Maybe you noticed yourself pausing before automatically saying yes. Maybe you caught yourself in an automatic pattern in real time. Maybe you even tried doing something a little differently. And then something subtle happened. You snapped right back. In the beginning, there is always this moment where things feel hopeful. You notice something, you pause, you made a different choice. And for a second, you think,
Okay, maybe I can do this.
and then a few days later, you find yourself right back in the old patterns of overcommitting, overthinking, taking responsibility for things that were never yours. And the temptation in that moment is to think,
See, this is just who I am.
but I really want you to hear me when I say this. That moment does not mean you failed. That moment is part of the process. Because here's what nobody really talks about when it comes to change. Your mind can understand something long before your nervous system and your body believes it. You can intellectually know you don't need to earn rest. You don't need to prove your worth through productivity. You do not need to carry everything alone. And still, deeply feel uncomfortable when you actually try to live that way. That's normal. It's frustrating, but it's normal. Because your body has spent years learning the more effort you put in, the safer you would be. So when you stop over functioning, your system doesn't immediately interpret that as growth. It interprets it as risk. There was a period in my life where I felt I understood everything. I could see the patterns, I knew where they came from, I had a new way of thinking about everything. And still, I would catch myself going right back into the same loops of overcommitting and overthinking. And it was frustrating because I thought, if I understand this, shouldn't I be able to just change it? And what I had to learn was this: awareness doesn't immediately change your baseline, it gives you access to a new one. But your body is still going to want to default to what it knows. For example, I would like consciously decide, okay, tonight I'm resting. And then maybe 15 minutes later, I'd suddenly become deeply concerned about something incredibly unnecessary, like responding to an email that absolutely could have waited until tomorrow, or researching something random. Because apparently, my brain felt like it was an urgent need to know the best way to store avocados. And underneath all of that what was really happening was discomfort. Stillness felt unfamiliar. Not being useful felt unfamiliar. Not being mentally engaged in solving, fixing, planning, anticipating, it all felt unfamiliar. And I kept thinking the answer was to become more disciplined. But I didn't need to be more disciplined. I needed to stop treating rest like something suspicious. I feel like we get confused. We think we have a time management problem, or a motivation problem, or maybe even an emotional regulatory problem. But what we actually have is a safety problem. We've learned that staying ahead kept things stable, that being useful made us valued, that handling things prevented chaos. So now, when we try to operate differently, our body reacts like we're removing the very thing that kept our life functioning, even when you know logically that's not true anymore. This is why the final step in the Align framework is N, normalizing your new path. This is the most difficult of the steps in the whole framework, because insight alone isn't enough. Awareness matters, understanding matters, but eventually you have to change the way you live your life and make decisions. Even when your body keeps telling you that this new way of being might be dangerous. This breakthrough is not exciting. It takes repetition, repeating it over and over again, until eventually what felt unfamiliar starts to feel normal. And if you're in this phase right now, where you understand it, but you're trying to actually live it, that's something I write about more deeply on my Substack, High Achiever Off Duty. There, I write more about how to apply this in real life, explain the nuances, and I also have a space where you can contact me directly to ask questions as things come up for you. So if you want that kind of support as you're working through this, you can check that out in the description down below. One thing I see a lot is people expecting themselves to immediately operate in their new standard perfectly, because we are taking the same pressure and driven mindset we had before and applying it to healing. Now suddenly you're trying to regulate perfectly, rest perfectly, set boundaries perfectly. And then when you struggle, your brain goes,
Wow. Apparently we're failing at recovering too.
and this is why I keep saying the goal is not about becoming a completely different person overnight. The goal is creating enough safety internally that you no longer need to operate from constantly doing. So instead of measuring success by,
I never fall into old patterns.
instead, start measuring your success as, I noticed that automatic thought faster. I was able to pause my automatic response sooner. I was able to recover more quickly after I overextended myself. Awareness in real time is progress. That's what progress actually looks like. There is something else I just want to make you aware of that doesn't get talked about enough, because no one mentioned this to me when I was going through this. Changing your patterns can bring up grief, because sometimes you realize how long you've been operating in survival mode. You realize how much energy you spent proving your value. You realize you built your entire identity around being needed. And that can be emotional, not because you're weak, but because you're human. There's grief in recognizing how exhausted you've been, how disconnected you are from yourself you've become, how long you've been carrying things you never should have been carrying alone. And I think it's important to say out loud because people often expect healing to feel empowering all the time. Sometimes it feels empowering, and sometimes it feels like sitting on your couch realizing you don't even know what you generally enjoy anymore because your entire personality became handling things efficiently for other people and ignoring yourself, which is not a fun realization, but it's an honest one. So here's a practice I want you to try. At the end of the day, I want you to ask yourself, where did I operate from my old pattern? And where did I make a different choice? Don't judge it, just see it. Just be aware. Because the goal is not about becoming hypervigilant about all your patterns of thinking and acting. The goal is to become conscious enough that you actually have options again. And from there, you can start to shift. And that's what this entire process is all about. Choice. Not becoming passive, not lowering your ambition, not abandoning your responsibilities. It's about choice. The ability to decide when to push, when to pause, what's yours, what isn't, and what actually matters. Because when you've been living at such a high level of overfunctioning for such a long time, everything feels urgent. Everything feels equally important. And one of the biggest shifts is realizing it's not. If there's one thing I hope you take away from this series, it's this. You are not failing because these patterns are hard to change. These patterns were practiced for years, decades even. And of course, they don't disappear overnight. The fact that you're noticing them at all already means something's shifting. And I genuinely would love to know, what's been the biggest realization for you throughout this series? Or maybe what's the one pattern you've started noticing in yourself? Drop it in the comments down below. I read them, and honestly, seeing what resonates helps me create videos that actually meet people where they are. You do not need to spend the rest of your life proving that you can carry everything. You already proved that. Now the work is learning that you can allow to exist without constantly bracing for impact. And that's not weakness. That's recovery. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.